Uh, a sleepover. It's supposed to be a night of whispered secrets, shared laughter, and feeling safe with your friends. But what happens when the familiar sounds of the night start to change? When the whispers aren't yours, and the laughter twists into something terrifying? Tonight, we're listening to the sounds they were never supposed to hear. These are 5 sleepover nightmares. Story 1. The rattle in the walls. Our first story comes from a viewer named Chloe. It asks about the first and last sleepover she ever had at her best friend Maya's new house. I was 12, and Maya had just moved into one of those old 2-story Victorian homes. You know, the type they look charming on the outside but are secretly full of groans and drafts. Her parents were still renovating, so there were boxers everywhere. For her 13th birthday, she invited me and our friend, Liam, over for a sleepover. Her parents took off for the night, leaving us with a mountain of pizza and a single stern warning: don't touch the thermostat. We were camped out in the living room, our sleeping bags in a triangle on the floor, watching some cheesy 80s horror movie. The wind was howling outside, so at first, we didn't think much of the other noises. The house was just settling, her dad had said. It had character. It was around midnight, during a quiet moment in the movie, when we heard it. A faint scratching sound. It seemed to be coming from inside the wall, right behind the TV. Liam, ever the brave one, muted the movie. Did you guys hear that? Maya rolled her eyes. It's just a mouse. This old place is probably crawling with him. She unmuted the movie, and we tried to ignore it, but now that we'd heard it, we couldn't unhear it. The scratching wasn't frantic and panicky like a mouse. It was rhythmic. Slow. Scrape. 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 Scrape, like a fingernail dragging along wood. I looked at Liam. He was just staring at the wall, his pizza totally forgotten. That does not sound like a mouse, he whispered. Maya sighed, trying to act tougher than she felt. Fine. I'll prove it. She got up, walked right to the wall, and knocked on it loudly. Hey, Mousie? Quiet down in there? For a second, there was total silence. We all held our breath. Then, from inside the wall, a reply. Knock. 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 3 distinct, deliberate knocks. Perfectly mimicking Maya. The fun was gone. That wasn't an animal. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the flickering TV light. The movie was forgotten. There was only the thick, terrifying silence. The scratching started again, but this time it was different. Harder, more desperate. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way through the plaster. Then another sound joined in, a soft, metallic rattle. Faint, but unmistakable. Clink, clink. Rattle. What is that? I whispered, my voice trembling. It sounds like a chain. Liam guessed, his eyes wide. We spent the next hour frozen in our sleeping bags, listening to this horrifying symphony from inside the wall. The scratching, the rattling, and something new, a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards. It was the sound of pure misery. Maya was in tears. I want to call my parents, she sobbed, and say, what? Liam reasoned, that there's a ghost in the wall. They'll think we're nuts. He was right. We were trapped, terrified of the sounds, and just as terrified of not being believed. We ended up barricading the living room door with a heavy armchair and piling into one sleeping bag, a flimsy fortress against whatever this was. The noises went on for what felt like an eternity. Sometime around 3 a.m., the scratching just stopped. The silence was almost worse. We waited, listening to our own hearts pounding. Then came the sound that haunts me to this day. A voice. It was a dry, raspy whisper, and it sounded like it was pressed right up against the inside of the wall. Let me. Oh, we screamed. All three of us. We didn't care about looking crazy anymore. Maya scrambled for the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial, while Liam and I just yelled, pointing at the wall where the voice came from. When Maya's parents rushed home, they found us huddled in a corner, completely hysterical. Her dad, a practical guy, grabbed a hammer and a crowbar. He was sure it was a raccoon trapped in the walls, and he was going to put an end to our hysterics. He found a weak spot in the plaster and started prying. With a sickening crack, a section of the wall came away. He shone a flashlight inside. The scratching had been real. There were deep, raw gouges in the wooden slats. The rattling had been real, too. A rusty, broken manacle was bolted to a stud, its chain dangling into the darkness below. But the most horrifying discovery was what wasn't there. There was no person, no animal, just a small, forgotten space between the walls. A hollow, coffin-like void, and at the bottom, resting in the dust, was a single, yellowed human bone. Police later identified it as a femur. An investigation revealed that a century ago, the house belonged to a man suspected of making his brother disappear. The brother was never found, and they never had enough evidence to charge him. Turns out, you don't need a coffin when you have walls. Maya's family moved out less than a month later. I never went to another sleepover. Sometimes, when it's too quiet at night, I can still hear it. That dry, desperate whisper, begging for a release that came 100 years too late. Story 2. The Whispers from the Basement. This next story comes from someone who wants to stay anonymous. It's a chilling reminder that some doors should stay locked, and some games are never just games. When I was 14, my friend Alex lived in a house with a horror movie-ready basement. Deep, unfinished, a single bare light bulb, and a heavy wooden door that was always locked. His parents just kept old furniture down there, but to us, it was a dungeon. One Friday night, 3 of us, me, Alex, and our friend Sam, were having a sleepover. We'd run out of movies and were bored out of our minds. That's when Sam, who always had a flair for the dramatic, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Let's talk to someone," he said with a grin. He drew a crude alphabet, numbers, and the words yes, nitrogen, monoxide, and goodbye. A DIY Ouija board. We used a plastic bottle cap for a planchette. It was stupid and we all knew it was fake. But hey, it was something to do. We sat on the floor, put our fingertips on the cap, and Sam kicked it off. "Is anyone there?" he asked the empty room. Nothing. We tried again. Still nothing. "This is lame," Alex said, about to pull his hand away. "Wait," Sam insisted. "Let's ask something specific. Is there a spirit in this house?" Slowly, the bottle cap began to move. "Why?" "Essa." A nervous laugh escaped me. "Okay, who's pushing it?" Both of them swore it wasn't them. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't fun anymore. "What's your name?" Sam asked, his voice a little shaky now. The cap moved faster. Zozio. I'd read enough creepy internet stories to know that name. Zozo, the supposed Ouija demon. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Okay, I'm done," I said, trying to pull my fingers away. "No, you can't," Sam hissed. "You have to say goodbye first." But before we could, we heard a sound. A low thud from directly beneath us. From the basement. We all froze. Another thud, then a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. Alex's face went white. "My parents are asleep," he whispered. "No one's supposed to be down there." The scraping stopped. We held our breath, and then we heard the whispers. They were seeping from under the basement door. It wasn't one voice, but dozens, all murmuring over each other. We couldn't make out any words, just a constant, snake-like hissing of secrets. "This isn't funny," Alex said, his voice cracking. He crept towards the basement door, and Sam and I followed. As we got closer, the whispers grew louder. Alex put his ear to the wood, then snatched his head back like he'd been burned, his eyes wide with terror. "What?" I mouthed. "They're saying our names," he breathed. Over and over. I didn't believe him. I had to hear it for myself. I pressed my ear against the cold door. He was right. Amidst the chaos, I could hear it. A chorus of faint, dry voices, all whispering my name. It was personal. Suddenly, the doorknob began to rattle violently. The heavy door shook in its frame as if something was throwing its full weight against it. The whispers stopped, replaced by a single, low laugh from behind the door. It was deep and guttural, full of pure malice. That's when we lost it. We ran. We didn't stop until we were in Alex's parents' bedroom, shaking his dad awake, groggy and annoyed. His dad grabbed a heavy flashlight and went to investigate. He unlocked the basement door, put it open, and flicked on the light. "See?" he said, his voice echoing down the stairs. Nothing. The basement was just as it always was. Old furniture under white sheets, stacks of boxers. No one was there. He shook his head at us. "You kids and your scary movies. Now, go to bed." We went back to the living room, feeling foolish but still terrified. As we started to clean up, I noticed the bottle cap on our makeshift Ouija board. It wasn't in the middle anymore. It was sitting on the word goodbye. We never talked about that night again. Alex's family moved a few years later, but he told me once he never went back into that basement. He said that sometimes, late at night, he could still hear faint whispers coming from under the floor. A crowd of voices, murmuring in the dark, just waiting for someone to play another game. We'd listened for sounds we weren't supposed to hear, and in doing so, we'd let them know we were listening, and they never forgot. These stories are a chilling reminder of how fast a fun night can turn into a total nightmare. The little sounds we usually dismiss can sometimes be something else entirely. If these stories are sending a chill down your spine, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. We have more nightmares to share. And if you have your own story about sounds you weren't supposed to hear, drop it in the comments. You never know who else has heard them. Now, let's get back to the darkness. Story 3. The man outside the tent, our third nightmare, reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters are human. This story was sent in by a viewer named Jenna, and it's about a backyard campout that went horribly wrong. I must have been about 10. My friend Sarah and I were obsessed with camping, but our parents were not obsessed with letting two 10-year-old girls go alone into the woods. So, we compromised. A campout in her big, fenced-in backyard. We set up her dad's tent, rolled out our sleeping bags, and armed ourselves with flashlights and way too many snacks. Her house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac and backed onto a small patch of woods. That tall wooden fence was supposed to make it feel safe. As night fell, the normal suburban sounds were replaced by crickets and rustling leaves. It was peaceful. At first, we stayed up late, telling ghost stories. By 1 a.m., our sugar high was crashing, and we zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags. I was just drifting off when a sound snapped me awake. Snap. The sharp, clear sound of a dry twig breaking. I opened my eyes. Sarah was already sitting up, pointing her flashlight at the tent door. "What was that?" she whispered. "Probably a raccoon," I said, not very convincingly. We waited. Silence. We told ourselves it was nothing and lay back down, but I couldn't relax. Every little sound felt amplified, and that's when I heard it. The soft crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Someone was walking around our tent. My heart was hammering. This wasn't a small animal. This was the heavy tread of a person. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. We just laid there, barely breathing, listening as the footsteps slowly circled our tent. Once, twice. Then they stopped, right outside the thin nylon wall next to my head. The silence that followed was the worst part. We knew someone was standing just inches away. I could feel their presence, a heavy weight in the darkness. I imagined a face, staring at our shadows, just listening. After what felt like an eternity, a new sound started. The faint, metallic zizzip of the tents. Zipper. Someone was opening our tent. It was moving impossibly slow, a millimeter at a time. The sound was quiet, designed not to be heard. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a parent checking on us. This was someone trying to get in without us knowing. Sarah let out a tiny, choked sob. As quiet as it was. In a oog, the zipper stopped. We heard a sharp intake of breath from outside. He knew we were awake. Pure panic took over. We both started screaming, not words, just raw shrieks for help. Scrambling to the back of the tent, the reaction from outside was immediate and violent. A hand slapped the tent wall where my head had just been. "Be quiet." A man's voice snarled. It was low and gravelly, a voice coated in rage. Then, the zipper was wrenched down in a single, brutal tear. The tent flap was thrown open, revealing the dark silhouette of a large man crouched in the opening. We couldn't see his face, just his shape against the dim light from the house. Before he could crawl inside, the back porch light flicked on, flooding the yard with light. Sarah's dad, woken by our screams, was standing at the back door. The man froze for a second, like a deer in headlights. Then he scrambled backward and took off, crashing through the bushes. We heard the sound of the wooden fence splintering as he vaulted over it and vanished into the woods. Sarah's dad sprinted to us while her mom called 911. We were hysterical. The police arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the woods. They didn't find him, but they found his footprints circling our tent. And near the fence, they found a small shed the family rarely used. The lock was broken. Inside was a pile of blankets, empty food cans, and a collection of hunting knives. The man had been living there, just feet from their house. He had been watching them. He had been watching us. The police said he was likely a drifter. We never found out who he was, but I know what he was. He was the monster from our ghost stories, come to life. He was the sound of a twig snapping in the dark, the sound of footsteps circling, the sound of a zipper being pulled open in the dead of night. Story 4. The echo on the baby monitor. Some sounds are scary because they're loud and violent, but others are scary because they're quiet, and they come from a place that should be silent. This story, from a viewer named Liam, is about that second kind. I was 16, and my friend Chris was staying over. My parents were out for the night, and I was in charge of my 2-year-old sister, Lily. No big deal. She was a heavy sleeper, so babysitting just meant I had to exist in the same house as her. Lily's room was upstairs, and my parents had one of those super sensitive audio-only baby monitors. You could hear every tiny breath. Chris and I were downstairs playing video games with the volume cranked. Around 10 p.m., I went to the kitchen for sodas. The baby monitor receiver was on the counter, and I paused to listen. All I heard was the soft, rhythmic sound of Lily's breathing. Everything was fine. An hour later, I was losing the game badly. I muted the TV in frustration. In the sudden silence, I heard something from the kitchen. It was coming from the baby monitor. It wasn't Lily. It was a soft, melodic humming. "Dude, what's that?" Chris asked, putting his controller down. I walked back to the kitchen and held the receiver to my ear. The humming was faint, but clear. It was a lullaby I didn't recognize. And it was definitely not my 2-year-old sister. It sounded like an adult woman's voice, but it was distorted and distant. My first thought was interference. We live in a packed neighborhood. It had to be picking up a signal from another house. It was the only explanation I was willing to accept. "Just picking up a neighbor's monitor," I said, trying to sound casual. But the humming was just off. It had a sad, eerie quality to it, and underneath it all, Lily's soft breathing was still there, a steady rhythm against the strange melody. I tried to change the channel on the monitor, but the humming just stayed there. I put it down and tried to ignore it. We turned the game volume back up, but the fun was gone. I kept glancing towards the kitchen, towards that little plastic box piping a stranger's song into our house. About 30 minutes later, the humming stopped. I felt a wave of relief. The interference was over. But the silence that replaced it was worse. I went back and listened to the receiver. All I could hear was harsh, crackling static. And Lily's breathing. It was gone. "I can't hear her," I said. panic rising in my throat. Maybe she just rolled over, Chris suggested. But he looked worried too. I held the receiver to my ear, desperate to hear that soft breath. Nothing but static. I was about to drop it and run upstairs when a new sound came through. A voice. A whisper. The same woman from the lullaby. But now she sounded dry and close. It whispered a single word. Liam. My blood ran cold. Eat. Kno mai. Name? This wasn't interference. My hand was shaking as I dropped the receiver on the counter like it was red hot. Chris and I just stared at each other. There's someone in her room, he whispered. Every horror movie instinct screamed at us to get out of the house, but my little sister was up there. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet, and Chris armed himself with a floor lamp. We crept up the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot. The hallway was dark. Lily's bedroom door was slightly ajar. As we got closer, I could hear it. The humming, that same sad lullaby. And it wasn't coming from a speaker. It was live. I took a deep breath, kicked the door open, and flicked on the light. The room was empty. Lily was sleeping soundly in her crib. The window was locked. The closet was empty. There was no one there. The humming had stopped the instant the light came on. On her nightstand, the baby monitor was glowing, but there was no source for the voice. No explanation. We searched the entire upstairs. The house was secure. My parents came home an hour later to find us sitting on the living room floor, completely shaken. We tried to explain, but it sounded insane. A ghost in the machine. A voice that knew my name. Of course, they blamed interference. An overactive imagination. But I know what I heard. That night, something was in my sister's room. It watched her sleep. It hummed her a lullaby. And it whispered my name. It was an echo from a place I hope I never find. Story 5. The Knocking Game. Our final story tonight comes from a user named Mark. It's about a sound so simple it becomes the most terrifying thing in the world. The sound of a knock at the door. I was 15, sleeping over at my friend David's house in a new, half-finished subdivision. It was just him and his 10-year-old sister, Chloe. His parents were on an overnight trip, leaving us in charge. We were all in the finished basement, David and I on air mattresses, Chloe in a sleeping bag. The basement was our kingdom for the night. Around 2 a.m., we finally decided to call it a night. The house was dead silent. I was in that weird space between awake and asleep when I heard it. Knock. 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 It came from the top of the basement stairs, a firm, steady knock on the door to the kitchen. I opened my eyes. David was already sitting up. "Your mom home early?" I whispered. He shook his head. "They're not back till tomorrow afternoon." He checked his phone. The screen lit up his face. Las 2:17 alto M. Way too early. The knock came again, a little louder. Knock. 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 "Maybe they forgot something," David said, trying to convince himself. He stood up and called out, "Mom, Dad?" Only silence. He took a hesitant step up the stairs. "Hello." The only answer was another round of knocks. Knock. 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 Harder now. Angry. Chloe stirred in her sleeping bag. "What's that noise?" "C'est mumblit." "Nothing. Go back to sleep," David said quickly, his voice strained. I looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. This wasn't his parents. We just stood there, staring at the closed door, which had suddenly become the scariest object in the house. The knocking started again, but the rhythm changed to a frantic, furious pounding that seemed to shake the door frame. Knock dash, knock dash, knock dash, knock dash, knock. "Call the police," I whispered. David fumbled with his phone but hesitated. "What if it's just a prank? We'll get in so much trouble." As if on cue, the doorknob began to jiggle violently. We heard a man grunt with effort from the other side. That was it for us. We grabbed Chloe, now wide awake and crying, and scrambled into a small storage room at the back of the basement. We locked the flimsy door and huddled together in the dark, just listening. The pounding on the basement door stopped. For a second, we thought it was over. Then we heard heavy footsteps on the kitchen floor directly above us. Thump. Thump. He was in the house. I don't know how he got in. It didn't matter. It was in seed, and we were trapped. We could hear him moving around upstairs, opening and closing cabinets. Then, the footsteps came back to the kitchen and stopped right above our heads. Complete silence. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Chloe was muffling her sobs in David's shirt. We waited. Then the knocking started again. But, Tistim, it wasn't on the door. Knock. Knock. K-no. 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 Right above us. He was knocking on the floor. He knew exactly where we were. It was a twisted game of Marco Polo. Every time we tried to shuffle away, he would knock on the floor right above us. He was toying with us, enjoying our terror. This went on for what felt like a lifetime. The slow footsteps, then the 3 mocking knocks. Finally, we heard a new sound. A car pulling into the driveway. Headlights cut through the small basement window. David's parents were home. The footsteps upstairs stopped. We heard a loud crash from the back of the house, the sound of shattering glass, and then silence. We stayed in that storage room, too terrified to move, until we heard David's dad calling their names. We burst out and met him on the stairs. The police found the kitchen windows smashed and muddy footprints all over the house. But the man was gone. When we told them about the knocking, about how he toyed with us, one of the officers went pale. He said it matched the MO of a home invader they'd been hunting for months. A guy who didn't steal things, he just liked to terrorize people. He liked the sounds they made when they were afraid. The most chilling part came the next day. David's dad noticed he had a missed call on his cell. It was from the house landline. From 2:16 a.m., right before the first knock, he had called from inside the house to make sure no one would answer, to make sure he was alone with us. That knock was never a question. It was a statement. I'm here, and I know you're there. A knock at the door. A whisper on a baby monitor. The crunch of leaves outside a tent. These are ordinary sounds, but in the dead of night, they can become the stuff of nightmares. They remind us how thin the veil of safety really is. What's the most terrifying sound you can imagine hearing in the middle of the night? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you want to dive deeper into the darkness with us, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, try not to listen too closely to the sounds of the night. You might just hear something listening back.